If you want to give, oh, all right. I'm just going to share my screen.
I'm just making you the host now, Maggie, so it might take.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Can you see that okay, Tracy? Can everybody see that?
Yes, it looks great.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. So I am going to be kind of narrowing down the huge topic of kind of pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period, kind of into the choices that surround that time period. Kind of, we call that the perinatal period. It includes kind of that whole process. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into birth because that's where we see a lot of those big choices and a lot of the choices that people aren't as familiar with. Birth can be a little bit mysterious. It's not something that a lot of us have experienced or seen before, we have our own kids or before pregnancy. So I just kind of want to dive into that a little bit. So my name is Maggie Mehr. Tracy did a great job introducing me. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work as a birth and postpartum doula and a childbirth educator, which is really where a lot of that hands-on experience comes. I have that training, but I've also been lucky enough to be at over, 100 births of, various different types and kind of seen the tools that the families that I work with benefit from as they're going through this process. So just a couple of notes. This is a presentation that I want to make as inclusive as possible. So I use the language birthing person, laboring person, pregnant person, and support person, just to include the whole spectrum of birthing and parenting experiences. So, all of those identities kind of fall under that umbrella. So sometimes people haven't heard that terminology before, so I just like to give a heads up right at the beginning. So the things that we're going to kind of touch on is what are birth preferences? So that's kind of the terminology that I use and a lot of birthing professionals use when we're talking about the choices in birth. So what are birth preferences? And then how do I know what my preferences are? So how do you make that decision around what you would like to be a part of your birth process, your pregnancy process, your birth process? And then how do you communicate those preferences to your care team and your support team once you've kind of figured out what they are? And then we'll have time for questions. This is a really pretty small group, so I am happy to answer questions as we're going along. Usually I'll stop for questions at the end. That's just kind of how I approach my teaching, but please feel free to ask questions. We will talk a little bit about what options or decisions or things might be available to you that are pretty common or things that people maybe haven't heard about, but I'm not going to cover every single choice that you might run into during your birth process. That's just, there's so many different ways that pregnancy and birth shake out. But if you do have specific questions, please feel free to ask me. I can't give you medical advice. I don't have medical training, but a lot of those questions I can answer or point you in the right direction. A lot of times the right direction is going to be your provider. So your doctor, whether that's an obstetrician, an OB, a family medicine doctor, or a midwife. They may be able to kind of answer those questions about your individual situation a little better than I could. So it's not that I don't want to answer your question. I just want to make sure that you are getting the most accurate information. Well, let's jump right in to what are birth preferences. So maybe depending on where you are, I'm not sure if people are currently pregnant or, in that kind of trying to conceive place. Maybe your baby has just arrived, but maybe during this process you have heard of a birth plan, or maybe in the past you've heard of a birth plan. And the difference between a birth plan and birth preferences is that a birth plan is a little bit more of a roadmap. It's a little less flexible. And one of the most important things to learn about the pregnancy and birth and parenting process is that you really you don't have a lot of control over how it goes, how your baby decides to be born, what that process looks like, what each of those steps along the way looks like. But you do have a say in the approach to that process and the things that are important to you and the things that you can do to prepare for that and things that you can do to communicate with your provider and with your care team. So that's why I use the term birth preferences. So things that you're hoping for, things that are important to you, rather than this is exactly how I want my birth to go, because it's just not realistic. So a couple of things about birth preferences is I like to think about birth preferences or like a birth preferences form or template as a communication tool. It's kind of you introducing yourself and your family to people who maybe have never met you before. You probably had prenatal visits with your provider and gotten to know them a little bit and talked a little bit. But when you go to the hospital, or if you're having a home birth and maybe your midwife has an assistant who has not met you before, or if you're at the hospital, there's nurses that you haven't met before, you want to introduce yourself to them and let them know what is important about them or what is important about you and your family for them to know. That can be things like your identities and experiences that might be important to your birth process. Who's going to be with you? Do you have a support person? Are they your partner, spouse, co-parent, family member, friend? Do you have a doula? What's their name? They usually want to know that information, so they just kind of get an idea of who's a part of your support team. Pain medication preferences. Those are kind of a big one that you can include on the birth preferences form. Things that maybe you would want for comfort measures like massage, using the tub, all of those kinds of things. If you want to make a birth preferences form, because it's definitely not required, you don't have to do this, you could just have a conversation with your provider. There are so many different templates out there, depending on where you're giving birth, the hospital, the midwife, the provider, they may have a form that they give to people that's more specific to where you're giving birth. So for example, Meriter Hospital in Madison, big hospital in the area where people give birth, they have their own template. And it kind of talks about things that are available at Meriter, the things that are routine in terms of your care and your baby's care. And that can be kind of helpful to give you just a basic idea of what's available to you and what are some decisions that you might like to make. But you can also kind of wing it and do it in a way that works best for you. So some people want a template or a checklist. Other people want bullet points. Other people are like, I'm just going to write a couple paragraphs, just kind of introducing me and my, approach to birth or my past experiences, whatever feels best for you, that feels that's going to be the best way to communicate your needs and experiences to the people on your team. What questions do you have about just kind of what birth preferences are in general? I don't know if you can hear my dog snoring in the background. She's having a very good nap. All right, awesome. So how do you even know what your preferences are when you are approaching birth? There's a couple different steps that I kind of like to break it down to in questions to ask your provider. So again, your midwife, your OB, your family medicine doctor. Sitting down with them during a prenatal and kind of talking to them about, what is your approach to induction? What is your approach to cesareans? Do you think it's likely that those would be something that would be a part of my birth? So an induction would be your provider starting your labor for you rather than having it start on its own. And then a cesarean, which is where you would go into the OR and baby is born by a surgery. So what is kind of their approach to that, scheduling those things? What is their approach to what comfort measures might be available to you? So, the hospital that you're giving birth at, do they have a tub? Is that something that you might want to do? Do they have water birth available? There's a hospital in Madison that has water birth. A lot of home births, a water birth is available to you, talking to them about what that looks like. And if that's available, if that's something that they support, when would you be able to get in the tub? Would you be able to do that if you're being induced? Generally, if you have an epidural, if you have that kind of pain medication, you're not able to get into the tub. So kind of talking to them about what options might be available. And then talking to them about the pain medications that would be available to you. Most hospitals are going to have an epidural. A lot of hospitals are going to have IV pain medication. Some hospitals have nitrous oxide, or kind of like the laughing gas, or if you've watched British shows, or like Call the Midwife, they call it gas and air. They might have that available to you. With a home birth, there's really not going to be pain medications available to you, but they may have some things that they can support you in terms of, massage and positioning, relaxation, meditation, things like that. So what are those things that are available to you through your provider, and at wherever it is that you're giving birth? Talking to your provider about newborn care. So how are babies being cared for once they're born? Big parts of this are delayed cord clamping. So sometimes they'll wait until baby's umbilical cord stops pulsing before they clamp it and cut the cord. And sometimes they'll wait 30 seconds or a minute. Some providers, depending on how well baby is doing, how well they're breathing on their own, they may cut the cord earlier rather than later. Those are really good questions to ask your provider. Asking them about antibiotic eye ointment for baby and a vitamin K shot. Do they do those? Can we talk about the pros and cons of those? What does that look like? Are you doing it right away, or are you waiting that first hour so that I'm bonding with my baby, maybe feeding them for the first time, and then we kind of do it once they're getting a little bit sleepy after that first hour where they're alert and bonding with you? Do they encourage skin to skin? Does your baby get to go to skin with you right away? Can your support person do skin to skin with your baby, especially if you're not able to? All of those are really, really important questions, just to kind of know what's available to you, and talk to someone who's kind of an expert in those areas about what their approach is. And just because something isn't available, or something that is routine isn't necessarily something that you might not want, doesn't mean that you can't talk to them about coming up with a different plan. And I'll talk a little bit about advocacy after this. And then another important conversation to have is with your support person or your support team. That looks different for lots of different people. A lot of people, their significant other and their co-parent will be their support person. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a doula. Sometimes that's just kind of the main support person that the birthing person has. But sitting down with them and kind of talking to them about what's important to you while you are going through the birth process. So a good place to start is, okay, these are the ways that I like to be supported or cared for when I am stressed, when I'm really focused and working hard, when I'm in pain, when I'm uncomfortable. Let's talk about, hey, I really don't like having my hand held, but I would really like it if you, sat close to me, if you rubbed my back, talking about those things that you need. And then also talking to your support person about the things that they might need so that they can be present for you and support you. Do they need to have snacks with them? Do they need to be focused on just taking a little time to take a nap and have somebody else step in, whether that be a nurse or a doula, just so that they can be rested so that they can support you? Other good conversation, especially if your support person is a co-parent or a significant other, is what do each of you think of when you think of kind of your ideal birth? What do you think of when you're like, I imagine, that you'll, be really, really present and involved with me. I'm imagining that I won't have pain medication, and then having your support person talk about what's kind of important to them. And if there's differences, having a conversation about that and saying also, this is an experience that my body is going through, but I do want to make sure that, you're feeling safe and things like that. Also talking about things that you're afraid of. So what is kind of that big fear that maybe is causing you to lose sleep a little bit at night, or when you think about the birth gives you a little bit of anxiety? So both of you having that conversation about, I'm really, I don't know why, but I'm just really hung up on the idea of having an induction. My friends have had inductions and it makes me nervous about that. Well, what would make you feel comfortable and supported and safe to, the best of your ability if that situation were to happen? Do you need to bring in more support? Do you need to have an extra conversation with your provider about what that's going to look like? Do you need to change what your preferences around pain medication might be? Those are all, really important things to think about, because we can't control what type of birth we might have, but we can control having those resources around us to feel secure and as safe as possible, even if, you're still a little bit nervous and a little bit scared. Other important questions to talk to your support person about is, how do they want to be involved, or how do you want them to be involved? Do you want them to be in the tub or shower with you? That's definitely something that's an option. Usually those tubs are big enough for 2 people. If you had a cesarean, so if you went into the OR for a C-section, would your support person be comfortable being in a surgical environment like that? If not, who might be that somebody else who steps in and supports you during that time? Other thing is with, people who really care about you and are supporting you. Sometimes it can be hard for them to see you, working really hard, or, being in pain, struggling. That can be hard for support people. So how are they going, do they think they might react to that? And what do they need to do to be able to take care of themselves? Because you won't be able to take care of them. Your job is to be going through that birth process and giving birth to a little person. So they'll need to kind of prepare of how they'll take care of themselves. Last thing to kind of talk about too is, if for some reason baby or babies, I don't know if people are having multiples, need to go to the NICU, so the newborn intensive care unit, where babies need a little bit of extra support. Maybe they were born a little bit early. Maybe ahead of time that they have a medical diagnosis that needs more support. Do you want your support person to go with them to the NICU, or do you want them to stay with you during that postpartum period? If they do go to the NICU, is there somebody else that you would want with you to support you? Some of these conversations could feel a little bit overwhelming. So I will point you in the direction of some resources to kind of just have a jumping off point for some of these questions. Expecting Better and Crib Sheet, these are both by Emily Oster, are super kind of evidence, data-based books that talk a little bit about those important decisions, procedures that might come up during your birth. So Expecting Better is a little bit more narrative. It's a little bit more, there's more of a story kind of talking about what birth is like in the United States. And Crib Sheet is a little bit more of a breakdown of, hey, this is the evidence on epidurals. This is the evidence on eating sushi during pregnancy. So kind of those really kind of relatable common questions that come up during this time. So those are really great books. I think she has some fairly updated ones. So they were written several years ago, and then she's kind of updated them with some new evidence. Penny Simpkin's pain medications preference scale. So you can just type this into Google. So pain medications preference scale, and a bunch of different PDFs will pop up. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have Penny Simpkin before it. That's just the woman who created it. And what it does is helps you kind of decide where you fall on this spectrum of wanting pain medication or not. Because some people think it's, yep, I definitely want pain medication. Nope, I definitely don't want it. Or I'll just wait and see. And really, it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that. And this kind of helps you break down where you fall and then give suggestions for your support team on how to support you in that decision. Very few people don't have a preference. So you'll kind of find where you fall on that. I will say it's pretty gendered, using woman and mom, things like that. That's tough. The resource itself is very helpful. Last is evidence-based birth. So evidence-based birth is a website where they kind of take all of the data and the research and the resources surrounding different birth topics and kind of interpret them so that you can understand them more easily. So you're not having to go out and find all of these different articles and these studies. They've kind of brought them together and they analyze them and break them down so they're easier to understand. So they're going to talk about delayed cord clamping. They're going to talk about epidurals. They're going to talk about the effect of diabetes or gestational diabetes on the size of your baby and how to have that conversation with your provider. It's a really great place if you have a specific topic that you're curious about. You can go all the way down to the bottom of the page. The search bar is a little bit hidden, and then you can just type in delayed cord clamping or induction. They also have a podcast. So if you're just kind of wanting to take in information passively, you can listen to that podcast and they'll talk to people about their birth stories. They'll talk to birth professionals. They will break down those different topics in a podcast form. And sometimes that's easier for people to take in, especially if they're busy or not really super into reading, because sometimes it can get a little bit wordy. I think evidence-based birth is great. That's kind of where I'll point people when they have a question. What questions do you have about figuring out your birth preferences? Okay. Well, let's then move. Oh, Tracy, did you have a question?
Yeah. Well, I've already had my 3 kids and I'm not planning on having any more, but I'm just curious if you have any recommendations for people who may have an OBGYN or even a midwife who isn't supportive of their birth preferences, how they navigate that to achieve the birth that they're looking for.
Tracy, it's like you read my PowerPoint. So that's a really, really good question. So, oops, not that one. So how do you communicate your preferences and advocate for yourself? So Tracy, I'll get to your question in just a second, but it very much ties into what we're going to talk about. So the first step is kind of figuring out what your preferences are and then putting them together, whether that's just kind of in your brain, if you have a template, a little document, whatever that might be. Bring that during a prenatal to your provider and have a conversation about those preferences. Like Tracy was asking, there may be a situation where you and your provider disagree, or it may not feel like they're supportive of your choices. And that's where it can get a little bit sticky. And this is where I like to remind people that this is your body, this is your birth, this is your family, and you do have a say in how you are treated and the people who are caring for you. That can get a little bit difficult, especially in our system of kind of insurance. Maybe there's only a particular provider that's covered, so you're not having that same amount of choice. But having a conversation with your provider. So, hey, you said that you think it's a good idea for me to be induced at 39 weeks, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about why, why you think that's a good idea? Okay, well, that's not making a ton of sense to me. Here are some questions that I have. Or maybe, hey, can we have this conversation a little bit later? I need to think about it. Go to evidence-based birth, talk to your support person, and just kind of figure out how you're feeling ahead of time, and then bring those thoughts, bring the resources that you found to your provider and kind of talk to them, because a lot of times you can come to an agreement about something that works for both of you, where you're feeling empowered, you're feeling like you're being seen, and they feel that they can look out for your well-being as well. Worst comes to worst, you can switch providers. You are not married to your provider. You don't owe them anything. They are there to care for you. So if they have a partner that maybe you would prefer to work with, or just even switching the type of provider, maybe the OB situation isn't feeling good for you, switching to family med or midwifery, or if you're just feeling a higher level of anxiety and the lower risk kind of approach with midwives and family med isn't helping you feel safe, maybe moving to work with an OB where they're working a little bit more with higher risk pregnancies and specializing in that. But it is okay to stand up for yourself. It is okay to switch providers, even in the hospital. If you have a nurse that's just it's not working for you, it's not feeling supportive, it's okay to say, you could talk to them and say, hey, these are some things that are really kind of bugging me, or having your support person do it. Could you stop doing that? Or could we do this differently? Or talking to the charge nurse, so that's kind of the nurse who's in charge of the floor. I think I'd like to work with a different nurse. This just isn't working for me. And that's okay. You're the one who's giving birth. In situations where maybe you don't have that flexibility of switching provider, having an advocate like a doula can be helpful for you to navigate those situations. That's another birth preference to look into. Do you want that extra person who is professionally trained in, supporting your choices, giving you options, helping you advocate for yourself? A lot of times that can make a really big difference in making a more difficult relationship with a provider a little bit easier to navigate. So those are some options that you have there. I know it's not perfect, but just remembering that you're the one giving birth and you do have a say in how you're treated and what your care is. Another thing that I think is important to do with your birth preferences is bring a paper copy with you to the hospital or to your place of birth and show it particularly to the nurses. They haven't met you before. They may ask you, they say, hey, is there anything I need to know about how you'd like your birth to go? Or just about you and your family? And you'll say, yeah, I have a birth preferences form. Will you take a look at it? That's a great way to kind of start that conversation and let them know what's important to you. Other thing too is to bring a paper copy. Is a lot of times providers work within a group. They're not the only one who's attending their births. So it can be important ahead of time to know whether they will be the ones who are at your birth or if it will be one of their partners. Because if you haven't met that partner before, you may want to show them your birth preferences form just so that they can take a look at it. Sometimes you're able to have some prenatal appointments with other providers in that group, and that can be helpful just so it's not a strange face. But some of the groups are pretty big and it can be hard to meet all of them or, even some of them. But just knowing what to expect ahead of time and having that paper copy to show them when you get to the hospital or your birthing place. I tend to say hospital or home just because in the Madison area, we do kind of have those two birthing hospitals and home births. We don't have a birthing center anymore, but I'm not exactly sure wherever everybody is joining from. So it's a little different from city to city. The other thing to keep in mind is, like I kind of said before, it's kind of impossible to talk about every single decision that you might ever make during the birth process. So I think it's really important to just kind of build in the tools to be able to make those decisions for yourself. And I really like acronyms because I'm in childbirth ed. It can be a little bit of an easy way to remember things, or childbirth education. So the acronym that I use for decision making is BRAIN. It's the process that you go through every day when you're trying to decide whether you're going to come to this event, what kind of sandwich you're going to have for lunch. But this breaks it down into steps that are easy to follow in maybe an unknown or stressful situation. So the B in BRAIN stands for benefit. So what's the benefit of this decision that you're trying to make? I usually use epidurals as an option because that's a decision that a lot of people are making. So benefit of an epidural, really good pain relief. Awesome. Benefits can also be something that maybe you're hoping to get. So with an epidural, a lot of times you're able to take a nap. So maybe you're like, I'm coping well with these contractions, but I have been up all night. I'm exhausted. I just need to sleep. We're hoping to maybe get a nap out of that. That's a benefit of an epidural. Then R is the opposite side. So what are the risks? What would be the risks of an epidural? And these are going to be the things that are, listed on the consent form that you sign. So there might be a risk of, this or this or this. But it's also things that might be more specific to you as an individual. So if you maybe hadn't wanted an epidural and you're not sure how you're going to feel about being stuck in bed because you're not able to get up and move around with an epidural because you're numb from the waist down, maybe that's something to take into account. What's that going to maybe do for your mindset if you do choose to have an epidural? That may not be a risk for somebody else, but it doesn't mean it's not important for you to think about when you're making that decision. Then A stands for alternatives. So what is something else that you could try instead? So alternative to an epidural could be getting in the bath, changing position, IV pain medication. So IV pain medication is usually an opioid medication or a narcotic that goes usually into an IV and a shot in your arm. It kicks in quicker through the IV, but wears off faster. The in your muscle takes a little longer, but it lasts longer. So you get quick kick in and longer coverage. So that could be an alternative to help you manage whatever it is, pain or discomfort that you're experiencing. You can bring alternatives to your provider, or you could ask them for some. So what's something else that we could try instead? What might be my other options before we try an epidural if that's not something maybe I want to do right away? Then I is intuition or instinct. So for some people, this might just be their gut feeling. For some people, this might be, is there a sense or a signal I'm getting from a higher power, if that's part of their belief system. But it also can just kind of be, what do you know about yourself that you should probably take into account? So a silly example that I use is when there's a medication or a procedure and there's like a weird little side effect that a small portion of people get, I usually get that side effect. So if someone's like, hey, this medication is going to help with your headaches, it's amazing, but 20% of people hallucinate pink elephants when they take it. I'm going to think about how I feel about hallucinating pink elephants before I take this, because I do tend to get those weird side effects. So things that you know about yourself, things that the people you trust know about you. Another good example might be, you're thinking about an epidural and, you just had a cervical exam. They just checked your cervix and you're 9 centimeters dilated. You're almost fully dilated at 10 centimeters. And you might be, just based on how this labor is going, I think I can just get through that last centimeter. Let's hold off. Let's just try to have this baby. Or you might say, each centimeter during this labor I've had to work hard for each of those centimeters. Let's just get the epidural now because I'd like to be more comfortable, even during that pushing process. So just, your instinct, your intuition based on what you know about yourself. And then last, and probably the most important, is no or not now. It is okay to say no to decisions and procedures and things like that. It is okay. It is also okay to ask questions. It is also okay to ask for time, even if you just need 5 minutes to sit with your support person and cry a little bit. Like, this isn't exactly how I thought my birth was going to go, and I need a little bit of time to grieve. That is okay. The nice thing about giving birth is generally you're not sick. Nothing is wrong with you. You are just having a baby and you're getting support through the medical system. So usually there's not an emergency. Usually you do have time. It could be, hey, I've been up all night and I haven't eaten anything. And a lot of times I know, you were talking about starting Pitocin, which is the medicine that they use to induce labor or to speed up your labor. And I know that usually I can't eat anything besides clear liquids when we're doing that. And I haven't eaten in a really long time and I haven't taken a nap. Can we wait an hour so I can have a snack and I can, lay down and close my eyes for a little bit? Because right now I feel like I could sleep. It's okay to ask for that. It is okay to ask for what you need. And it's okay to say no. There are benefits and risks to saying no to different decisions, just like there's benefits and risks to saying yes. But as long as you have your questions answered and you understand what you're saying yes or no to, it's totally up to you. What questions do you have about communicating your preferences and advocating for yourself? Okay. So applying this to now, if you are currently pregnant or going to be pregnant soon, and after birth, the same principles apply. Having conversations with your care team. So after birth, maybe you're talking to your baby's doctor. Maybe that's a pediatrician, a family med doctor, a nurse practitioner, talking to them about what options are for supporting you with feeding your baby, supporting, just any different kind of care that might come along with raising a baby, caring for a baby. Talking to the people in your life who will be supporting you while you're parenting. So if that's a co-parent, if that's a postpartum doula, if that's a family member or a friend, talking to them about that kind of approach and what you need. All of this is still relevant. Brain, those decision making, that's all still really important in advocating for yourself. Okay, I have a question in the chat. So during birth, is it okay to have things like Gatorade or even a fruit shake? Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something I probably should have talked about when you're asking questions of your provider. What is your approach to eating and drinking during labor? A lot of providers, if you don't have an epidural and if you are not being induced, so your labor is they're not starting your labor for you, they're supportive of you eating whatever you want during labor. So if you want Gatorade, if you want a smoothie, if you want to order some food in, I'd say keep it pretty light because sometimes your stomach can get a little questionable. Nausea, vomiting is pretty normal during labor. So keeping it pretty light, but eating and drinking during labor, the evidence shows that it's really important because you are working hard for usually kind of a long time and you need that fuel. If you can only have clear liquids, so if you have an epidural, you're being induced, or talking to your provider, there's another reason that they'd want you to stick to that. Gatorade, juice, Jello, broth, anything that's going to get calories in. Broth can be great if you're like, I've just been drinking juice all day. I'm really sick of sugar. Switching it up with, it's kind of like you're having some soup. Jello is great because it feels like you're eating something and chewing, and can kind of fill up your stomach. Great question, Jimmy. And Tracy has a question. Can you talk about knowing when to go to the hospital if you're having a hospital birth? Awesome question. So this is another thing you're going to want to talk to your provider about, because sometimes they may want you to come to the hospital earlier, depending on your pregnancy, your risk factors, how far away you are. Sometimes people are coming, an hour away from their birthplace. But generally, if you're having your first baby, most providers will say, when your contractions are 5 minutes apart, and they are 1 minute long, and they've been in that pattern for an hour or more, usually a good time to get ready to start heading into the hospital. That's where those contractions will be more intense. You can't walk or talk through them. You have to kind of pause and breathe and work through them. That's a good sign that you're getting into active labor, which is a good time to head into the hospital. Sometimes if your water breaks as your first sign of labor, which happens in about 10% of births, your provider may have you come in to confirm that your water has broken, just to make sure that everything is okay. But there's no reason to rush in unless there's a concern. So you can kind of take your time, take a shower, do what you need to do to get to the hospital. Kristen, does 511 apply to second births? Really good question. I would say it can be a good rule of thumb, but I wouldn't wait quite as long. So with 511, with the first birth, it's like, okay, probably time to start getting ready to head to the hospital. Let's go get the bags, all this kind of stuff. When we're hitting that 511 with a second baby, a lot of times it's like, all right, let's go, especially if your water has broken. Things can move pretty quick once your water is broken with a second birth. But also a good conversation to have with your provider, especially depending on what the first birth looked like. If it was really fast, maybe you're getting to the hospital before 511. If it was, 24 hours, as you're getting into that 511, probably a good time to head to the hospital. Good question, Kristen. Okay. So these are all really good questions. And I want to leave plenty of time if you have other questions for me to be able to answer those. So what questions do you have about anything that I talked about, just kind of at birth in general, doulas in general? I want to make sure that you kind of come away with the information that you were hoping for. So any questions? You're also free to unmute yourself and ask questions as well. Very C. How do you know what to expect in terms of timing if the first birth was induced? Really, really good question. It's usually, so the biggest difference between the timing with induction and a labor that starts on its own is that really long waiting period of when you get into, what's the word? Admitted. When you get admitted to the hospital and they're starting that induction process until you are actually in labor, that's a really big chunk of time. But when you're actually in labor and things are moving along, your cervix is changing, that can look pretty similar to what a birth would start on its own might look like. So the rule of thumb with second babies, second births, is it's about half as long as the first one. So you can make a little bit of an estimate based on how long your induction was when you actually really started to have those contractions and were in labor. You don't have to include all of that extra time trying to get it started. All right, Tracy has a question. What services does the postpartum doula provide? Kind of whatever you need to feel supported during that time. What I'll often do is I'll do some meal preparation for my families if that's something that they need help with. We do a little bit of support around feeding baby, especially if they're lactating and chest feeding or breastfeeding baby. maybe just hanging out, like going outside for that first walk with your baby on your own. I've definitely done that before. Sometimes it'll be holding baby or kind of helping getting baby to sleep, but really it's more just kind of supporting you as you care for your baby. It can also be helping organize the things that you need from your support group. So helping you, or support team. So lists of chores, when someone calls and says, hey, what can I do to help out? Well, my doula and I have put together a list of things that you can help with. We really, really need the sidewalk shoveled. Is that something that you're able to do? Just kind of helping, and then understanding what's the normal postpartum kind of recovery process. It's very individual for different families. Okay, when hiring a doula, do you hire them for the whole month? So wife is due September 29th. That will be her 40th week. It can come early, right? So we hire a doula for the whole month of September. Really great question. So generally, you're going to hire your doula before you get into what we call the due zone. So kind of those 2 weeks before your due date and 2 weeks after, because you want to be able to build a relationship with them, talk about the preferences, how you want to be supported, help you navigate that pregnancy time. And then when you hire them or when you interview them, they'll talk to you about what it looks like to be available to you during your due zone. So they usually will have an on-call period. They'll usually have an on-call period where they are available to you, whether you call them in the middle of the night or, during the day, so that they can come and support you. But you would talk about that ahead of time with your doula before you hire them. Do you have birth plan templates you'd be willing to share? I'm not a fan of the Meritor one. So this is really tough because there's so many of them and not all of them work for everybody. But a lot of times, books that you might be reading, I know that Pregnancy, Childbirth, and the Newborn, which is by Penny Simkin, that has kind of a birth preferences form. That one can be kind of a good jumping off point, but I don't have one in particular that I recommend. How I usually approach birth preferences with my clients or the families that I support is I have a questionnaire that I kind of go through with them, asking some of those questions. If the Meritor one's not working for you, your provider may also have one, depending on who your provider is. I know the UW midwives kind of have their own form. The Madison midwives have their own form, but I don't have one that I recommend. Tracy, what happens if your doula is attending another birth when you need them? That is something that you will also talk about with them when you hire them. Most doulas should have backup. So if they know that they're going to be unavailable for a certain amount of time, so sometimes I would be taking exams and I'd say, I'm not going to be available for these 6 hours. This is the person that you can reach out to if you need support. But if I was at a birth, there was always someone who was backup for me during the on-call period that they could call to get doula support. So there isn't always a guarantee that it will be your doula. Usually it is. It's not the same as doctor and midwife groups, but they are going to make sure that they have backup for you. And you'll talk about that ahead of time. Why should we hire a doula if we're planning for a medicated birth? Great question. It's really up to you. Doulas can be really helpful because there's going to be parts of your birth where you may not have medication on board, where you are going to need some support coping. If you have a cesarean birth, you may want support in that decision. I would say, 50 to 60% of people have an epidural. And I think that was reflected in the families that I supported. And, I was still there helping them with positioning to make sure that, baby was in a good position to be born, helping them with pushing, just managing the emotions of birth. Because, just because you might have an epidural doesn't mean that, your support team is off the hook. You're still kind of going through that laboring process, still making decisions. still needing, an advocate if you want one. But again, it's totally up to you. Any opinions on chiropractic adjustments right after birth for baby? I know plenty of people do choose to do this. I'm assuming that this would be chiropractic adjustments for your baby, your newborn baby. You would probably want to work with a chiropractor who specializes in that, who does work with little tiny babies. And I would run it by your baby's provider before you do that. But it's definitely something that people do choose to do if their baby is maybe having some feeding issues, or the full range of motion in their neck might not be there. Sometimes people do choose to do the chiropractic adjustments. Great questions. Other questions or follow-up clarifications from any questions in the chat? Should I bring formula ahead of time? Good question. It depends on how you plan on feeding baby. So if you are planning on pumping or breast or chest feeding, you don't need to bring formula with you. You probably don't even need to have formula at the house, because that's something that's fairly easy to get a hold of if you did need it. And then if you are planning on formula feeding from the beginning, if there's a particular brand that you felt like you needed to use, you could bring that, but they have it available to you at the hospital. They also have donor milk available to you. So this is human milk that's kind of treated the same way that blood donations are. So it's screened, and then it's guaranteed to have a particular nutritional content. This is available to, if you're giving, I know at Meritor specifically, this is available to any baby who might need it. It's not just for babies who are in the NICU. I know you would have access to that at St. Mary's. I'm not as sure about the other hospitals, but I know it is something that's becoming more popular. So you do have options beyond formula if you wanted to. But I would say you don't need to bring it to the hospital with you unless there's a particular brand that it was important to you to use. What should be in your hospital bag? Well, that is a very big question. It is less than you think. What's really important is that you have you and your support person, birth preferences, insurance information, just in case. You probably want an outfit or two to be able to hang out in postpartum or to go home in. So something comfortable, something that fit you from 4 to 6 months of pregnancy, no jeans, and clothes and things for your support person as well. A lot of the hospitals are going to have kind of toiletry options available to you, but if there's particular shampoo or conditioner brands that you want to bring, if you want to bring your own toothbrush, they have toothbrushes if you need them, but if you wanted to bring those just for kind of the overnight. A lot of times they will have birth balls available to you to kind of sit on. They also have something called a peanut ball. It's a ball shaped like a peanut. They usually have those available to you, but yoga mats, massage tools, those are probably things that you would want to bring for yourself, but you don't have to bring those things. Those aren't necessary, just maybe if that's something that you would want to be part of your birth. Do you know any resources educating the support people, such as how to apply counterpressure, how to help with breathing techniques? Childbirth education classes. I'm a little bit biased because I am a childbirth educator, but that's a really big part of what childbirth ed does, is helping educate the support person about how they can support you and starting those conversations. A book that can be really great is, it's the support person's version of pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn. Let me look it up really quickly. Just The Birth Partner. It's called The Birth Partner. It's a little bit of a textbook. It's pretty big, but you don't have to read it cover to cover, but it really talks about how do you support someone who is pregnant and who is in labor. So taking a class is great. And then I would recommend the birth partner as well. Good question. And practice, definitely practice ahead of time. I know I got just a couple of minutes left, so any other questions I am happy to answer. Awesome. I think you're muted, Tracy.
Sorry about that. If there are no more questions, I would just like to extend. Oh, we do have one more. Is organic fabric or food better for babies?
That's a tough one because organic is a very, very big word, and that is regulated in different ways. I would talk to your provider or if you have picked out a provider for your baby, kind of talk to them about their approach. Because that can be a little bit of a tough one because organic means different things to different companies. I would say things that don't have like strong perfumes is really important. So laundry detergent, because that can be hard on baby's skin. But organic food, fabric, that's a little bit of a tough one. I would talk to your provider about that one, but it's a good question. And if you do have other questions, feel free to email me, Maggie Mehr, doula, at gmail.com. That's my doula related email. I don't take clients right now. I'm in the process of becoming a nurse. So I've kind of stepped away from that, but I'm always happy to point you in the right direction and answer questions, anything like that.
Well, thank you so much, Maggie. That was an incredible wealth of information that you shared with all of us today. I will send this recording to everybody on this call and everybody who registered for this class, just in case you want to rewatch it or share it with a support person in your life as you start to make the decisions as you get closer. So best of luck to everybody as you grow your families. It's a very exciting time, and I hope it's exactly how you want it to be. So thank you for attending.
Good luck, everyone. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye. Yay.
Just sent you the request to end the recording.
Okay, I think I accepted that. Cool.
Let's see. Oh, I think I can do it now. Stop.
Oh, it's still recording, I see. Do I need to stop the recording?
I think so.
All right, I'm gonna stop it.
Okay.
Stop recording.